Right then, we are getting some black primer down on here, and I'm brush painting it. Absolutely, we could have airbrushed it, but I decided to brush paint it because I find it quite relaxing and sometimes just enjoy doing that. So yeah, black primer. The reason why we went with black primer is because I wanted to mute the colours and have them quite dark so that the tanks would stand out in the foreground, and you'll see when we finish the build whether that works or not.
Well, that was a lot of fun. We won't be doing brush painting for the tanks. I'll want to airbrush them, but I'm just going around checking that there's nothing I've missed. If I can see brown, then we can blacken it out. But yeah, there we go. That's ready to go, and the fact that we've used black means that as we put the layers on, that we're going to start off in a darker place than we would have done. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about whether pre-shading or post-shading is better. To be honest, it makes no difference. It's just you do one before you put your paint on and one after you put your paint on. Personally, I prefer pre-shading because you're just doing it earlier in, and it's easier to tidy it up as you put the top coats on. Other people prefer to do post-shading, but I don't. In this instance, we're going to be doing neither. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting the shadows in like we'd paint figures. So giving me a black base gives me already a dark start to all these impressions in the ground. And we're not going to be putting any textures on or anything like that. We're just going to paint the plastic. Whole idea of this build is to see how we can bring the plastic to life just with a bit of paint. Right, bit of colour time. I've been looking forward to this. Right, so on the back of the box we have some colour suggestions, and actually these are really, really good because look at how this comes together. You've got colours at the back that highlight the vehicles at the front, and then you've got the figures in the middle which are different again to the tank, so everything stands out. And the Western eye looks at the top left first and then goes down and across, so you're sort of looking in that direction. So you're starting there with the wall and the bit of the building at the back because the smaller tank is allowing you to see that, and then you're ending up on the big tank at the end. So whoever came up with this composition absolutely knew what they were doing. It's bang on. So we're going to do something similar, and it's interesting. I picked a colour for the shutters and then went, will I do the door wood or will I do the door blue? And then I sort of went, well, I want to do something contrasting to the earth, and contrasting to the tanks. So I'll go with blue rather than green because we've got greens on the tanks and it'll really stand out. Then I picked the box up to have a look at what they'd done, and they've used blue as well. So we seem to be on the same page, although my blue's bluer than their blue. Right, so I'm using turquoise actually, which is 17966 from Vallejo, and it needs, because it's model colour, it needs a bit of thinning. So I put a couple of spots in there. It really doesn't matter. It's not scientific. It's not about ratios at the end of the day. Thinning paint until it's usable for either your airbrush or your brush, depending on what you're doing. And it's difficult to say. I mean, I have a sort of 50-50 rule with model colour, which generally works for everything. I did do a video on it, I seem to recall, a little while back. But sometimes if the paint's getting older, it's got thinner. If you've not mixed it very well and you've perhaps used thinner and you've got more pigment in towards the end, it changes. So it's down to experience and getting it the consistency you want. So all this nonsense about, oh, it's got to be like milk, what does that mean actually? So thin it until it's got the right consistency for the job you're doing with the tools you're using. It is all I can say. Right, so we're going to paint the doors, the shutters and the frames blue. Now, I used to be someone who would have started with the bricks and then done the layer above, but there's a reason why I don't do that anymore, and I'm gonna show you on this piece of paper. So if we think about our wall, we've got a layer of bricks, then we've got a layer with our plaster, and then on top of that we've got our shutter. Now if we paint the bricks first, what we're going to do is we're going to get paint on here like so, and we might get some part way up there, and then we'll do the same here and we'll get paint on there and partly up there. And so you've got a risk of not painting that edge properly. If you do then try and paint this in, you've also got a risk of getting paint on there, or the paint collecting and pooling in the corner, and that then makes this first layer that you painted less crisp, and you might even have to go in and touch up. If you paint on the top first, you can paint all of this and paint down the side, and it doesn't matter if you get some on there, and you paint all of that in. And then when you come to do this layer, you let's change colour to make it clear, you paint right up to the edge, so you sharpen that up and you're painting down there, so you're actually making the individual levels stand out better. I'm not sure I've explained that particularly well, but hopefully you get the idea as we do this. So that's why I paint from the outside in these days. I was always taught, and I can't remember who taught me to do this, when you paint figures, you paint like you're getting dressed. So you start with the flesh and move out. And it was actually my daughter, Daisy, who got into painting dragons and busts, and I got her a book for Christmas, and she said, well, they tell you to paint from the bottom up, but I find it much harder to do that. And she explained that she was painting from the top down and she found that easier, and she showed me, and it was like, wow, actually you bang on the numbers. So that's what we're going to do. So you can't always do that, and the first thing I'm painting is this window frame here, and you can see that we might have an issue when we come to paint in the lintel that it's sat on, but as a general rule it's going to be okay for this because the shutters are the highest point. That's why I'm choosing to do the blue first. Now then, I can see I've got a long hair. Right. And can you see, because we put the black down first, this blue, if I compare it to the blue against the white, can you see how it's sort of ever so slightly darker? It's just a bit more miserable, and that's what we want, because this building is shattered, and so it is miserable. It's not a happy building. And we can paint the edges in. And we can paint the blast damage because we can pick that out in whatever colour we want to later on. It doesn't matter if we get paint where we don't intend to, although I'm trying to paint with as much precision as possible, because you never know how it's going to affect lower levels. So you don't want to slap it all on willy-nilly. I think the moulding of this is nice, but in the case of the shutters here, the blast damage doesn't look very natural on the wood. It looks more like brick or concrete blast damage than wood splintering. Maybe we can sort that with our paint technique as we go. And also we've got a little bit of soft moulding, so we want to sort of crispen that up as we go as well. Now I'm painting around the back just because it's an easy way of making sure that we've got total coverage. If we just painted the front, you're never sure how much that you'll see when you're viewing it from different angles. So just going around and painting the back just means that we've definitely covered every viewing angle. And I've definitely got one hair longer, one bristle I should say longer on this brush than all the others. So first time I've used this brush. There we go, that's sorted it. So that's our window frame in. Just want to make sure I've got right up into that corner there and gone around that edge. Right, now we can put this shutter in. And again, it's a bit softly moulded, but we can tidy that up later on. And then when we do some shadow effects, we can sharpen it up again. Now, you can do a wash, but I might paint them in this time. Like when you're painting a figure, you don't generally do a wash, you're painting your shadow. And I think that's where I want to be with this. There we go. Great thing about acrylics is the speed of drying. It means I can go in and correct what I want to correct as I go. Right. So that's the sort of the window bit done. Now we can focus on this door. Now when we come to painting the weathering and aging effects, things we need to consider is how all of this gets handled and how it comes into contact with humans and other things that might wear it. So for example, at the bottom it'll be muckier because as it rains and it splashes up the dirt of this basically mud track outside, it's splashing up the walls, and then where people are coming in at hand height, you're going to have wear, and maybe they've bumped things and what have you into it, so it gets some chipping. So that's all stuff that you've got to start having in mind. And as you get close up and personal with these things, painting them, you start seeing that and visualizing that, and that just helps you with your thought process on how we're going to paint this up. So this great big cross frame on the door that these slats are all battened to, they're the bit that are going to have the most battering. So you know where it opens, where it gets handled, where it's hitting the frame and that sort of stuff. That's where it's all going to get damaged, so the slats should look more pristine or less used than the cross member on the front, for example. Now I'm going to go in and we're going to paint first of all this joining edge, because some of that is going to be visible one way or another at different angles and through the top of the arch and what have you. And we'll do the same with the top of the door, even though it probably won't be visible, it's worth doing it. And then this bit of the door, because we've cut it in half and made it cracked open, that also could be visible, so I'm just going to paint all of that so that if you do peer through and catch a glimpse, you see blue, not black, and certainly not plastic. Right, so that's my first coat down. Do I need to do a second coat? To be honest, no, but it's worth going back and just making sure that you're happy that you've not missed anything. So here I can see I've missed something. And sometimes when the paint's wet, it's less easy to see than when the paint's dry. So I'm just going in, making sure that everything's got a bit of colour on, particularly in the little sort of nooks and crannies. What I don't want to see is any black. I'm using the black to give me an uneven paint finish, which is going to help me with the appearance of aged paint that's sort of started to fade in places. So you can see there on the door particularly, you've got an uneven paint finish. Well, I don't want to remove that. I don't want to have a solid block of colour, because this is all helping with that sort of look of aged and weared and UV light and what have you. So I quite like the idea of it looking uneven. It saves me having to sort of deliberately paint it in, if you like. But we absolutely don't want to see any black. Right, that's our first colour down. That's the top layers done. So next thing is to think about the colour that we want for our top plaster. I don't want to do like a whitewash. I'm thinking more of a sort of a creamy pale stone colour. So let's go and have a look and see what we've got in our paints. We've also got a lower edge here, and that lower edge is sticking out a little bit, so we want to paint that first, and I think that might be a darker colour, like a more orangey stone colour. So let's go and find some paints to cover that off, and I'm going to go and wash my brush and palette. Right, I've come up with a couple of colours that I want to use as the base for my walls. We're going to go with this pale sand colour for the main wall colour, which I think is going to be really nice for weathering and what have you. And then I'm going for orange brown. It's one of my favourite colours. I love this colour. I use it for so many different things, and it's really great for adding depth to sandy colours when you want to as well. So I'm thinking of using that for this bottom section here and the lintel on the bottom of the window ledge there. Yeah, we're going to start with that. Because I'm using a Vallejo paint. I can thin it with water if I want. So if I decide to mix these, which I've never mixed these two brands before, so that might be interesting, then we'll go to water, because this thins the best with water rather than a chemical thinner. So let's, although you can thin it with the Vallejo thinner, we did a little video on that. So I'm just going to put one spot of thinner on that, because the orange brown is not as thick as it looks. Right, I need a brush. I think that's going to do it for us. So let's give that a bit of a mix in. The other advantage of having your paint slightly thicker is it gives you more control. So when we look at these walls, we've got to think about what colours we want topping everything off. Now, if that's a white plaster, we might want a more sort of orangey brown colour for the top of those. So we'll have to see. I'll make a decision on that in a minute. I'll think about it while I'm painting this in, and maybe painting this bit in first is going to help me with that decision process, possibly. You see what I mean? I put one spot of thinner in this, and it's already too thin, really, for brush painting. So I'm just making sure it's not pooled anywhere, so that thin layer dries fairly quickly. Do I want to do it as in the pillars? They've sort of depicted them differently. I think that's probably going to be better in the same pale sand colour that we're using for the main walls. So step. Yeah, let's do the step in this colour. So we're sort of implying that this is a stone now rather than a paint on the actual building, because this stone has quite a bit of wear. It's suggesting it's an older building by the wear on this stone. So, and by its style, you could see that it could be sort of Napoleonic period or something. So I'm guessing, because this is a sort of First World War diorama type thing, that we're in France or Belgium. So, you know, if you think about the period of the building, that can help you bring together your colours and how you present it. Okay, and then we said we wanted to do the lintel in this colour as well. Now, whilst we're painting this, I've decided that it's a little bit too orangey for the look I want. And so the second coat that we do on this is going to be slightly different. I'm going to add a little bit of a more stone colour to it and see if we can take it to where I want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for a moment, and while it's drying, I'm going to find a stone colour to add a bit of a grey tone to it and just take the brightness of it out a bit. Right, so keeping within the same paint system, we've got stone grey, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to make stone grey the base and then add a touch of that. And I find that the orange brown, it gets used mainly for adding to colours rather than being a colour in its own right. So even though I imagined it would look okay, when I put it down, it didn't achieve what I wanted. So what we're going to do is that for me is too neutral. I want it to be a bit warmer. So I mean, that's already much more where I envisaged it being. Perhaps a touch more. Spot of water just to thin it a little bit, and that thinning process will just help blend it all. What do I think? Yeah, that's getting there. Maybe a touch more. Touch more water. There we go. That's looking right. So unload the brush. Okay. So ready for a second coat, because this dries really quite quickly. So let's put this down and see what we think. Yeah, that's much more where I want it to be. And will be darker than that pale sand. So all good. And that looks a bit more like a natural sandy stone type colour. Just thinning it a little bit further because we want this to flow nice and evenly. There we go, that's better. Okay, so there is a window frame here. I'm going to paint, I've decided as we're doing this, I'm going to paint the window frame in this same colour. That's just going to show that as being stone rather than plaster, which I think is probably more likely to have been the case. Okay, that's our first coat down. I want to leave that to dry for a few minutes before we do a second coat, which we definitely need to do. I need to, unlike the wood where I want some unevenness, because I'm trying to emulate stone, I want to sort of have a more even colour. So I'm going to wash my brush, give it a few minutes, and I'm happy with that colour now. So we can let that just dry off for a moment. Okay, I have my pale sand all mixed and ready to go. We're doing quite an area now, so I'm using a wide brush. This one has an angle cut on it, you can see, and that just helps me do a little bit of detail painting with the corners, but we probably are going to need to go in with our little detail brush in some of these areas around the window area that I'm expecting. As always with big areas, when you're hand brushing, what you want to do is put your paint down nice and thin and build up your colour saturation with multiple layers so that you don't get any brush strokes. I don't know if I've got this thin done enough yet or not. We will find out when I put my first bit of paint on. So let's do that. Yeah, I think that's going to be okay. As you can see, we're definitely going to need more than one coat. So not too much on the brush, just a small amount on our brush. I'm painting the inside here, but I am going to pick that out in a different colour later on. Probably the next colour we put down, actually. And then you can see I'm just going back and evening the colour out. It's just going to help it go down more evenly as we go on. This is where enamel paints are better, because you can move them around longer. When you've got an acrylic paint and you've got it thin, you are going to find that it dries perhaps a bit too quickly. So I'm just going to go in with my detail brush there and get the corner done. There you go, that gives me a nice crisp edge. Don't worry if it's looking a bit scrappy to start with. That'll all sort itself out as you put more colour down, more layers. Make sure you get right in underneath all these capping stones. And I think this colour is contrasting well with the colour that we put down. And now we've got this lighter colour accompanying it. It's actually bringing down the starkness of that colour. You'll see that here where we put it in against our step there. And once again, we need to go in with our little detail brush around this door area. Okay, you get the idea. I'm going to carry on now and finish putting this this block colour, this base colour down, and then I'll come back to you when we've got that down and we're ready to move on. So what I want for the tiles, now that we've painted in our walls for now, just blocking the colours, what I want for the tiles is sort of like a terracotta look, and we need a sort of pinkish look for this under layer of plaster. So I'm hoping that I can mix some colours, because I don't have a terracotta or anything like that, so I'm hoping I can mix some colours to get where I want. I'm going to start with the pinkish colour, and I'm using Iraqi sand as my base. And then I'm putting Hull Red in, which is quite a strong, deep colour, but I don't think I need very much, so we'll put a little bit in and add a touch at a time and see where that takes us. So just going to put a dab in. That took us, that's made it sort of grey-like, hasn't it? That's not really the colour I'm looking for. Maybe I need a brighter red. Let's try that. I actually find mixing colours quite fun. There's a lot of trial and error involved in it, which can be quite a lot of fun. Right. So I've got carmine red here, which was the red I used on the underside of the Queen Mary 2. So it's quite a bright red. Let's see if we can liven that up a little bit. I wonder about doing it the other way. There we go. That is much more what I was thinking of. So for our plaster, definitely that pinky colour is exactly what we were looking for. So let's just thin that down a little bit. Brilliant. Right. Let's get that on, shall we? So yeah, it's too thin, so we need to thicken that up a little bit. So I'll put a bit more carmine red in. That looks thicker now, so let's try that.
That's better.
Right, yeah, happy with that colour. It will need a couple of coats to sort itself out, but the colour is great, and I think we'll have to see what it looks like when it dries. But yeah, that's pretty much spot on. That, well, that wasn't too bad. That didn't take long at all. Sometimes you can end up with quite a lot of attempts before you get where you want to be. Right, well, I'm going to carry on getting this colour down. I'll give it 2, maybe 3 coats and see how it all looks when it's done. But you don't need to watch me doing this bit, so we'll move on and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So that's my layer of plaster that's underneath the top layer painted in, and I know it all looks a bit blocky at the moment, but that's exactly what we're doing. We're block painting, we're putting the basic colours down before we start adding shadow and what have you to them. Some of these have big expanses of flat surfaces, so we'll have to break that up with some weathering techniques. So while all of that's drying, our next step will be to paint the bricks in, which we'll start with the grey, which will end up being the mortar. And I need to mix a terracotta colour, and I think we might be able to take some of that and turn it into terracotta with my good old faithful orange brown. So let's have a go at that. Well, we might need 3 coats, but I suspect that 2 might just do it. So I'll carry on blocking this out and then we'll see where that gets us to. Well, as I suspected, 2 coats was enough. That's exactly what I was looking for. Really happy with that now. So that's our base colours done for the outer walls. The bricks is the next stage, and we'll paint those in a sort of grey colour, a light grey colour, because when we start putting some washers down and other bits and pieces that we might do, that's going to darken. So we're going to start with a nice light colour, and we'll be painting the bricks in individually, which will add a lot more depth to the realism of the wall, I think. You can see that we've painted in some of this back plaster colour in the cracks, and it looks really stark at the moment, but it won't do when we've finished. There's a couple of cracks that we've not done. That's because when we put some darker colours in there, I want that red in the background, so it won't look red when we've finished with it. And we haven't done anything with this bit yet, because when we're painting the bricks, we've got bricks in the ground that we need to pick out, and we'll be picking those out first, I think. The ground colour, because of the unevenness of the black primer, is not too bad as it is, but obviously we don't want it sort of this treacly colour. So what we might do is look at doing a different technique, and rather than just painting it, build it up with some dry brushing, in which case we'll have to do some masking off of the walls. But I've not fully decided yet what my plan of attack is on there, but we have some colour down. It's looking quite colourful for now, and then we'll start dulling that down and highlighting bits and adding depth in the next few sort of goes. But for now, I need all this paint to dry and harden and what have you. We won't seal anything until we've got the bricks painted in, and then we'll give everything a seal with an acrylic varnish and get it all matte, ready for the next stages, which may well involve enamels and enamel washers and the like. So with all of that done, I'm going to let that dry, and I'll come back to you when we're doing some more.
Okay, time to prime the tanks while the paint's drying on the rest of it, and I'm using a grey primer. This is the Ultimate Primer, which is the same as One Shot and Steino Res. And on all those bottles it says doesn't need thinning, but it absolutely does. And in fact, the older it gets, the more thinning it needs, is my experience. So that's why you can see I'm not decanting it straight into the airbrush. I always thin my paints first to make sure I've got the consistency I need. Just using a cardboard box because I can't get my paint booth in with the camera very easily. And this is before I had my new camera that I filmed this. Take the needle cap off is usually my preference. It just helps me with any tip dry, which you tend to get when you're using primer, even more so. As you can see, with the primer thinned, it goes down really nicely. We're starting with the turret. So I've already prepped all the parts, got them on whatever they're going to be mounted on while I paint them. So this is the big turret there. We'll have the tank commander sat inside the turret eventually. And then the turret on the smaller tank. And obviously this shows any issues as well, so you never know when you're priming whether you're going to end up creating more remedial work that you couldn't see before. But actually, despite the age of the kits, they've gone together really well. So it's the body of the Renult TR-17. I'm just being careful and putting thin layers down and building it up. So it's quite soft molded, and what we don't want to do is overwhelm it and lose what detail that we do have there. And periodically we'll check for tip dry, which can also reduce the amount of paint you're putting down if you're not careful, which we're starting to do, I think. There you go, and you can see that's coming together really rather nicely. So we can do the Char B now, exactly the same process. All those different coloured plastics suddenly become grey. I guess that Matchbox did the multicoloured plastic so that you could build it out of the box and have some interest for those that didn't want to paint. I don't really know why they did multiple colours, but it's not presenting a problem, and we can get everything nice and even ahead of the painting to be done. So for those of you that are interested, this is a 0.4 needle, and I was putting it through I think it's the Eclipse I'm using here, Hadder and Steenback. Just checking we haven't missed anything, otherwise that's a good job well done. Right, time to start looking at the brickwork, and I'm going with light grey 17990. I've had to do quite a bit of thinning of this. I've had this for quite some time. It's a great colour and I use it a lot, so I think I bought 2 or 3 of these at once for something or other, and this is the last one. And yeah, it's just thickening up a little bit, so that's why I always say there isn't really a strict rule. I mean, I tend to thin this 50-50, but as the paint gets older, you might find that you're putting 60 or 70% in to get it where you need it to be. Anyway, we're going to use that light grey,
as the basis of our brickwork, and the reason being is we want this to get right down in between the bricks and become our mortar, because we're going to paint the brickwork individually. You'll see why when we come to do it, and it makes a huge difference to the look of your bricks. So yeah, we're going to just cover the whole thing, and then we know we've got in all the nooks and crannies, and when we start putting down the brick colours, it'll all be even. So this is where we can start to really sharpen up these edges. There you go, and you can see how I'm sharpening it up, but we can still see the red of the lower plaster. So that's going to come out and look really cool when it's done. So as this is sort of like the bottom layer of paint, this is where we do all our sort of tidying up. Now I'm not worried about the evenness on the bricks, because the bricks aren't going to be grey ultimately. I'm mainly worried about making sure we've got our paint colour all the way between the bricks. Sorry about that sudden bump, that's my daughter dropping something on the floor. Always sounds like it's something huge when it's dropped on the floor. It's probably a phone. You know, nothing valuable or anything she needs to take care of. Right, there we go. And don't forget the ends. It's those little moments when you forget something that comes to catch you out later on. Right, so that's our first bit of brick walling, and we've got a couple of patches. They can be a little bit difficult, so the trick is to make sure that you've not got too much loaded on your brush. Start in the middle and move out, and the reason why you do that is if you start in the middle, you're putting the paint down that's on your bristles in the middle, and then you're spreading it out as you move towards the edge. So by the time you get to the edge, you've got the least amount of paint on your bristles, so you have more control over how much paint you're putting down. There we go, and we can see how we can thin that line down, and that looks a lot more natural now, and that's before we've done any weathering effects. In hindsight, it would have been easier to paint these walls before we stuck them to the base, to be honest. Why I didn't think about that at the time, I don't know, but I didn't, so that's why I did. There we go. That's breaking it up nicely, isn't it? Again, another colour. There we go, that gives us a nice crisp edge. So you can see how painting from the upper levels down to the lower levels of the plastic helps you keep things nice and crisp and sharp. And I definitely think this is the better way of painting, brush painting things like this. Now we've got this little section at the side here where we can still see black, and that's because we've got a bit of wall section there, but they haven't marked out the bricks, but it's clearly at a different level to the plaster. And on the back of the box where we've got some imagery, it sort of shows that and makes that a bit more clear. So we're going to paint bricks in, is what we're going to do. There we go, that gives us a nice bit of depth towards the end of the wall. And then finally, we've got this section here. Yeah, that's looking good. Now, because we're painting, really, we're just painting the furrows here. We only need one coat, so we don't need to block the colour quite as solidly as we have with some of our other colours, because the paint's naturally going to settle in the area that we're actually painting. There, that's looking good. Just going to do the top of that there. Excellent. So that is our first colour down on the brickwork. Now I need that to dry. So while that's drying, I think we can prime a couple of tanks.
So I'm just positioning the tank commander in his turret so that we can fix his arm in place, resting also on the turret, I think it was. So yeah, we're not gluing him in, don't worry, but we're just making sure that his arm is in the right place before we take him away and paint him. And we might need to do some filling on the arm and that sort of stuff, but in this case actually we didn't. Got to say, with the exception of one little area on the front of the larger tank, the fit of the parts was actually really not bad at all. There was no big gaps to fill or anything like that, which I seem to remember having to do as a youngster. So yeah, I was quite pleased with how all this came together. Right, I think that is it for this week. In the next video, we'll carry on with the painting and get it closer to weathering. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. It's free, and that way you won't miss my first impressions, my tool reviews, my product reviews, and any of my builds, including wooden model kits as well as plastic. It's all free, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can hit my PayPal link in the text below. Every pound goes straight into the channel to keep the cameras rolling and to do more fun stuff for you to watch.